Hello guys, before I start this video, this is a disclaimer that needs to be put up. I usually don't put these types of disclaimers at the beginning of my videos because I'm usually very calm and collective, but there are going to be moments in this video where either me or someone I'm going to be doing a co-op with are going to be yelling throughout this video. If you are in any way sensitive to loud noises or yelling, be sure to either go or put your volume on a place where it's as low as possible. And if you're watching this video at night and you live with other people, be sure to wear some headphones so that way the screaming in the video won't wake anybody in your house. I don't usually yell in my videos because I'm generally very calm when it comes to talking about things, but in this video, who or what I'm talking about rubs me the wrong way to the point where I can't talk about these things calmly, but if you don't mind any of that, continue on. With all that said, enjoy the video. Monster Family is a 2017/2018 German animated movie based on a children's book by David Sapphire that was on my hit list for quite some time now. Unless you've been living under a rock, you guys may have remembered in my 2018 videos, which isn't a lot since I only released 2 major videos that year, when I put down teasers for upcoming videos of mine in the description of some of my videos. Basically, the original idea for Sean's yearly reviews, before I decided to change it into how it is now, was basically going to be like how Nostalgia Critic did Disney-cember, or what Yoshi Player did with Animation Explosion, where I'd review animated movies from a specific year. Though this time it would be from the current year. But considering personal stuff that happened in 2018 and the amount of exhaustion that it put on me, I decided to hold off on doing this. And these situations in particular made me feel less motivated in making videos, but I still decided to watch most of the animated movies that came out in 2018 anyway. And among all of those animated movies that came out in 2018, a few of them actually caught my interest and I thought that they would make an interesting review, such as Monster Family, Duck Duck Goose, and Lewis and the Aliens. Monster Family is going to be the first of these 3 that I'm going to be giving its just dues. I'll maybe cover those other 2 in the future, but I'm covering this one first, both because it came out first, and also due to me wanting to get this one off my chest and close the book on this movie once and for all. And similarly to my Sean's Network reviews on Nightmare Ned, this is a review in which I'm probably not going to get the script checked for, mainly because of the fact that I want to use this review as a test to see if people would be interested in checking the scripts for my future Sean's Yearly Review episodes or not. This was a movie in which I was not looking forward to going in, because formerly being someone who had DirecTV, its on-demand thing constantly kept on advertising this movie ad nauseum, and from what was shown in the TV spot for this movie definitely looked like it wasn't going to be good at all. And when I decided to watch this movie around the end of March 2018, not only did I end up being right, this movie ended up being a whole lot worse than I was originally thinking it was gonna be like. So, what is Monster Family about? This movie revolves around a family of characters that are basically unlucky a lot of the time, and for some odd reason they have British voices in the English dub. Wait, an animated product that has a character, or characters in this case, that are very unlucky where the characters have British accents. Where have I seen this before? Oh yeah. Anyways, the family members are basically turned into monsters because of a witch named Baba Yaga, because Count Dracula wants her to. And why exactly? Well, because the main character Emma mistakenly called him and wants to date her when he hasn't even met her. I haven't gotten to the writing yet, but that is already one of the lamest villain motivations that I've ever seen. And that's basically the extent for the whole movie. The rest of it is essentially filled with the family members meandering along, with pretty much nothing happening for the rest of the runtime until the climax comes around. And in the meantime, the movie is filled with nothing but filler, unfunny and non-existent jokes and unpleasantness. And I'll be coming back to that bullet point in a bit. Now, when this movie first came out, a lot of people had compared it to Hotel Transylvania. Why, you might ask? I don't even know myself, probably only because of the fact that this movie involves Universal movie monsters, but newsflash guys, having monsters in anything animated was not created by Hotel Transylvania in the slightest, and both films are completely different. Calling Monster Family a ripoff of Hotel Transylvania because it involves monsters is like saying that The Lion King is a ripoff of Kimba the White Lion because it involves lions in Africa. Oh wait, that already happened. But that doesn't mean that Monster Family is entirely safe from being unoriginal, because there are actually two things that this movie reminds me of. A Goofy movie and The Incredibles. I'm not even going to make a comparison to The Mitchells vs. the Machines, since that film came out 3 years after this film. The Goofy movie aspect comes from the family bonding parts where the characters try to spend time with and love each other, and The Incredibles in literally almost everything else. This film literally revolves around a family in which the brother is small and hyperactive, the sister is the teen that has a crush on a boy, the mom is usually the one that scolds the kids whenever they argue, and the father is the workaholic that is silent around his children. Oh, and there are parts in this movie in which one of the parents basically look like they're in love with somebody else, except in The Incredibles, it was a misunderstanding where it looked like Bob was in love with another woman, even though he wasn't. Meanwhile, in this movie, Emma is completely cheating on her husband, and later on in the movie admits to cheating on him. And I'm going to be swinging back to this point when I start tearing this movie to shreds. However, with The Incredibles, it has an actual story, and the characters are sympathetic enough for the audience to want to root for. The same thing applies to its sequel. Sure, it may not be as good as the original, considering the fact that the villain is a downgrade, and the seizures were way too much, but the characters were still likable as usual. They all felt like they had equal screen time, and it was an interesting story about the attempt for the characters to make superheroes legal again. When it comes to Monster Family though, it doesn't have any of that. For starters, the writing in this film is an absolute mess. Basically, in my Sean's Network Reviews series, I've already gone on about how some shows don't fit the 11-minute or 22-minute format. Well, in Sean's yearly reviews, there are going to be some films where I'm going to be going on about how they don't fit the feature film format. And Monster Family is definitely the first in this regard. For starters, this movie has a lot of filler. That's because this movie doesn't feel like it should have been a feature film at all, but rather a TV movie or a 30-minute TV special. A lot of these sequences, you can pretty much get the same experience from if they're cut down or shortened. Like, did we really need to see an extended chase sequence between Emma and Baba Yaga, or random clips of Baba Yaga failing to transport to London, or sequences where the family are wandering aimlessly in the desert? The answer is no, we didn't need to see any of these sequences happen, because in the case of the latter two, they don't further the story, they're pointless, and they are nothing but fluff to extend the film's length. While in the former's case, that could have been shortened and cut completely because it did nothing but drag on. And a lot of the writing choices in this movie too are very baffling, and it really makes this movie come across as really stupid, and not even the so bad it's good kind like The Adventures of Sonic the Hedgehog or Donkey Kong Country. It's the so bad that you ask the question of, what executive even thought of this writing decision kind? Such as the fact that at the beginning of the movie, Dracula has a dumb motivation for why he wants to marry Emma, and that is because of the fact that she accidentally called him since she was trying to find Dracula teeth for her Halloween costume. No, I'm not even joking. That is the only reason why he wants to go on a date with and eventually get married to her. Also, how did the people at this Halloween party mistake a normal family with people that are in a band? Let me guess, is it because they wanted to force in a reason for why Emma ends up breaking down and cries when they get kicked out? Or the worst and stupidest of them all, them using a joke that is run into the ground really fast as a forced and desperate plot device for how Emma is able to go out in broad daylight without burning. I even caught this major cop-out and plot device when I first watched this movie back in 2018. That just shows how incredibly dumb and lazy this writing choice is, as it almost feels like they reached writer's block and came up with this at the last second. The writing problems don't stop there. They also rear its head towards the characters. You know, a lot of that filler with the family walking in the desert and Baba Yaga failing to transport herself to London could have been used to actually develop some of the other characters or explain how some of them ended up having a change of heart. I mean, I know why some of them couldn't establish that, like Bull, who is the bully to Max, because he's not supposed to be the focus of the movie. It doesn't excuse the movie for using Steven Universe logic and having him get a change of heart off screen, or maybe it was only because of the fact that Max scared Bull in his monster form, but the movie doesn't establish if Bull even knows if this monster in particular is Max, but the others I just cannot excuse at all. Is there any reason as to why Renfield ends up becoming good by the ending? The film does not explain this. He only ends up becoming good by the ending of the movie because the plot demands it. And Dracula's bat companions also end up becoming good by the ending of the movie because potatoes. Also, side note real quick, you are not fooling me, movie. These bats are literally minion ripoffs. They speak gibberish, they're goofy, and they cause shenanigans, just like the minions from Despicable Me. Considering Norm of the North and Arctic Dogs, ripping off the minions is a new trend for animated movies, huh? And while I'm on the subject of animated movie cliches, they really pile up here. This movie is both a road trip movie, and this film also has the second act breakup that you've seen in most movies. You know, one of those movies in which two or more of its characters get into a major scuffle that causes them to split apart temporarily, and then it ends up getting resolved in the climax of the movie. Some of these films do these kinds of tropes better than others, while others you see it coming from a mile away. And Monster Family falls into the latter case. Although, in the case of this movie, I couldn't be happier to see these characters split, considering the fact that most of the characters in this movie are absolutely awful towards each other. That I was absolutely glad that they split apart. Why? Because all except for Max, most of the characters are actually better off when they are far away from each other. And yet this movie is actually expecting me to think that these characters deserve to be with each other. I'm sorry, but I just don't see it. Which leads me on to another topic, the characters. Honestly, some of the characters in this movie are some of the most nasty and reprehensible groups of people that I've ever seen in an animated movie. And whenever they aren't, they are bland and unmemorable. The characters that are only used as background characters are either bland plot devices that are used to further the story, or unpleasant and stock bully characters that beat down on the main characters. And the problem here is that if I can't even sympathize with the main characters or want to see them succeed, then what am I supposed to do with a film like this? You remember that one episode of Drake and Josh called Battle of Panthatar, where Drake and Josh get their invitations revoked from a party, all because Drake kissed someone who is the girlfriend of Thornton, even though Drake didn't know that she was his girlfriend. But then later on in the episode, they somehow made both Drake and Josh unsympathetic too, where they sneak into Thornton's birthday party and they ruin all of his gifts just to get a Beatles poster that Josh made Drake give to him. But Thornton still doesn't let them go in, and they steal 2 Galaxy Wars costumes without any repercussions. That's literally the type of product that Monster Family is. Something that just makes me ask, who am I supposed to be rooting for? The only likable character in this movie is Frank, the dad of the family. Because he's the one who talks the least, he's actually one of the few examples of a father figure in animation that is actually not unlikable or annoying, and he's actually kind, unlike the other family members. Too bad he's used as a device for this movie's joke that is run into the ground really fast, where he farts and then the other characters around him are repulsed by him because of that. Granted, not all of them are unlikable, only 2 of them are actually awful, while Max is just kind of there and is constantly used as a punching bag by both Faye and Bull throughout the movie. And you could technically call Cheyenne part of the family, but she doesn't count because she's only friends with Emma and that's it. And like Max, she's just there and is used as a hippie stereotype. The other 2 though, let's talk about them. Starting off with Emma. Now, when I first watched this movie, I didn't mind Emma. Granted, I didn't like her because she's basically one of those characters that I put into the everyman trope, or every woman because of her gender. Basically, a Doug Funny, Arnold, Tommy Turnbull, and Axel. But then on rewatch for this script, there was a part of Emma that rubbed me in such a wrong way that it alone makes her one of the worst characters in the movie, that being the fact that she treats her husband like absolute garbage. Despite the fact that she establishes at the beginning of the movie that Frank is stressed, both physically and emotionally a lot of the time, she chooses to rag on him for it, even in sequences where she isn't directly getting onto him for not joining her in scolding Faye and Max. Emma is knowingly getting onto him for not having the energy to do any of the scolding. And even worse, in the sequences where she's alone with Dracula, she chooses to smack talk about him behind his back. During the absolutely forced Act 2 breakup, while Frank is in his monster form and is unable to properly speak, and she knows this, she still decides to get livid and go insane because he didn't back her up, despite being stuck as a Frankenstein, and even knowingly decides to cheat on him with Dracula shortly after this moment. Well, you know what, Emma? I'm glad that you separated from Frank, and I'm so glad that this moment separated you all. Frank deserves a much better wife than you. And no, I don't care if she has regrets at the last second to force me to forgive her for what she did throughout the movie. By this point, it is way too late to make the audience want to forgive her after everything she did before that moment. And this only happens because the status quo is God, forcing all the characters into forgiving each other and saying that they're sorry at the last second. If Buck Cluck from Chicken Little doesn't deserve to be forgiven after he neglected his son throughout his movie, Emma doesn't deserve to be forgiven for treating her husband like dirt and knowingly cheating on him despite him being there for her at her time of need and basically disregarding him trying to comfort her because you didn't say anything to our kids! And Faye is the worst character in this movie, primarily because of the fact that, while she isn't the one with the most problems throughout the film, she's basically the cause of this movie being extremely unpleasant, and she goes overboard in this movie. I get that love makes you do stupid things. I mean, Max from a Goofy movie basically went to all sorts of desperate attempts to impress Roxanne, including lying to Goofy, and Violet from The Incredibles 2 is another good example. When her boyfriend didn't come over to get her, that made her so upset to a point where in one sequence, she's seen crying hard while getting ice cream while being invisible, and is in a fit of rage when she finds out that Tony's memory of her was wiped. But in this movie, nothing at all justifies what Faye does. It's already bad enough that Max gets bullied at school. He also gets bullied at home apparently, as in one sequence, Faye decides to purposefully assault Max with his own costume in front of the family, and whenever things don't go her way, she decides to insult her own mother, causing nothing but fights to break out and does nothing but blame her for things going wrong, even though Emma is trying to do things that would be fun for the family. I know that by the time that I'm recording this, there are still other Sean's Yearly Review episodes that I need to get to, but Faye is already the worst character in any movie I reviewed and will review for Sean's Yearly Reviews. She's definitely worse than Gary from Sahara and Lupe from Ferdinand, because as obnoxious and infuriating as those two are, they don't cause any harm while Faye does, and Faye is supposed to be a character that we're supposed to like, and not a character like Sissy or Ring Ring, where she's a character that the product wants us to hate. And while Faye is not as bad as either Gus Turner or Ollie Allen, partly because she realizes that what she does is wrong, she is still up there with those two. And that is another issue that I have with this movie. Whenever the film is not throwing bad writing and bad characters in our face, this film is not pleasant in the slightest. What I said back during my review on Ollie's Pack was no exaggeration. Monster Family is one of the most unpleasant animated movies that I've ever seen in my life, and bear in mind, I've watched both Chicken Little and The Nut Job, and this is the movie that made me feel the most uncomfortable. You know how one of the common criticisms that is often thrown at Wonder Park is regarding the fact that it's depressing and uncomfortable to sit through? That's Monster Family's problem in a nutshell. However, this movie is worse than Wonder Park because this movie combines this problem with a story that goes nowhere and incredibly unfunny jokes. In literally every single sequence of the movie, the world either beats down on these main characters or the main characters beat down on each other, which is just not a fun thing to witness, especially when this movie is going to get all emotional with its family bonding message and how the family is close together and the fact that they love each other as a family. Show, don't tell. From what this movie shows us, these characters do not deserve to have this kind of message or even be called a happy family. Literally, the alternate title of the movie is called Happy Family. I'm sorry, but if there is a happy family anywhere, it's certainly not with these characters. Shuffleboarding from SpongeBob and The Wedding from Drake and Josh were more truthful to the title of those episodes than this movie is with its alternate title. And I think that's why this movie is named Monster Family now, because Happy Family is one of the most unfitting titles ever. Monster Family is much more fitting, since from what this movie shows us, these characters are indeed monsters, because the main characters in this movie are absolutely awful towards each other for most of the movie. And the only ones that aren't awful are Max and Frank, but even then, they are treated terribly by Emma and Faye, as every single time that Max tries to say something to lighten up the mood, or if he slightly bothers her, Faye literally beats him up, even after Emma explicitly tells her to stop, and whenever Frank tries to calm Emma down or comfort her, she lashes out on him for staying silent and not doing anything about Faye and Max. Normally, I don't get onto something for just being mean-spirited, primarily because of the factor of how overused this word is, and there are things out there that can get mean, but can still be enjoyable. Ed, Edd n Eddy and Drake and Josh are some of the most beloved shows of all time that could be considered as sadist shows, and while there were some bad episodes of those shows, they hit a lot more than they missed because they were funny, had great one-liners, and the characters could still be considered sympathetic. However, if something can't even be considered as enjoyable, then this definitely can't be ignored. In the case of this movie, this got so bad to a point where it made this movie flat out draining to watch. And it's this aspect of the film alone, alongside all of the other issues, that puts this movie as not only one of the worst animated movies released in 2018, but also one of the worst animated movies that I've ever seen. It's things like this that makes me find this movie worse than both Sherlock Gnomes and Duck Duck Goose. Both of those movies also have writing issues, are completely generic, and are also unfunny, but they didn't make me nearly as uncomfortable as this movie did. And speaking of the humor, you guys might be wondering, what about the jokes? You did say that Drake and Josh and Ed, Edd n Eddy were funny, so how about this movie? And the answer to that is that the nicest word that I could use to describe the humor in this movie is abysmal. In fact, Monster Family is probably one of the most unfunny pieces of animation that I've ever seen. Why? Well, the humor in this movie is on par with the humor in Robot Boy, and that is definitely not a good thing, because besides the writing, bland and unlikable characters, and gross out, the humor is one of that show's worst aspects because of how badly timed, generic, non-existent, and immature it is. And Monster Family is no different. One joke that this movie shoves down your throat more often than not is that whenever Frank is stressed, he farts and everyone around him is repulsed by it, even being used as a plot device in one part of the movie. Other jokes can be badly timed, such as the beginning where the Batman ripoffs are playing on Dracula's piano, and you could see the punchline coming from a mile away. And this joke drags on for what feels like forever. And there are other jokes where all I'm thinking to myself is this meant to be humorous? Legit, I've seen moments in Family Guy and Adam Sandler movies that are funnier than this movie, because they at least tell jokes or do something that could be considered humorous. This movie, on the other hand, just does things and expects its viewers to laugh. Like, here's a question. Do you find this movie going all like, isn't Faye hypnotizing a bunch of fashion models into becoming monkeys so hilarious? As a joke. If you said no, that's because that's not a joke. All the character is doing is just doing things with nothing humorous going on. Literally the only things in which I found humorous in this movie is the moment where the family turned into monsters for the first time and Emma's reflection doesn't appear in a mirror and she doesn't see herself in the mirror, only Baba Yaga, and said, "Oh my god, I look hideous!" See, movie? That's how you do an actual joke. Emma is turned into a vampire, and her reflection doesn't appear because she's invisible and thinks that Baba Yaga is her. And there's also the moment in the desert where we see skulls that look exactly like the family's. Yeah, it's a low-hanging fruit kind of joke, but it's something that you can call an actual joke. Even with some other animated movies that have jokes that could be considered a lot more offensive, lowbrow, and cringe-inducing, like Food Fight, Norm of the North, and the Emoji Movie, they at least have jokes that could be considered as jokes. I mean, they're unfunny, cringy, and immature jokes, but they are at least jokes, and those jokes were shown to be done better elsewhere. Monster Family, well, I've gone on about this movie's humor enough, so I won't repeat myself. One of the only positives that I have with this movie is that the animation is pretty good. Granted, it's not Pixar levels because the designs in the movie look pretty generic, and in an English dub, there are lip syncing issues if you look hard enough, but the rendering looks nice and the effects look gorgeous. However, as the old saying goes, good writing can save bad animation, but bad writing can never be saved by good animation, and Monster Family is definitely not the last in this regard. Considering the fact that movies like Walking with Dinosaurs, Ice Age Collision Course, Rock Dog, and Duck Duck Goose fall into the same trap. But yeah, with all of that venting out of the way about this movie, my recommendation for this film is to definitely skip over this one by all means necessary and lock it in the closet for all eternity so it can't do any harm, because this movie is an actual monster. Unless you want to waste your time for over an hour, I'd suggest skipping this one altogether and just watch a Goofy movie and the Incredibles films instead. Or heck, if you want to see a much better version of this movie, watch The Mitchells vs. the Machines instead. It's a film that came out 3 years after this movie that basically does everything that this film tries to do, and it does it so much better. It's better written, the characters are much more likable, and do something to actually earn this family bonding love message at the end, and it's actually funny. It's not as good as Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, but it's pretty much Monster Family done better in every single way. Oh, and for some odd reason, this film managed to get a sequel back in 2021 for a reason that the world may never know. But if Norm of the North and Rock Dog of all movies can get their own sequels, pretty much any movie at this point can get one.